I wasn't supposed to see anyone for 4 days. That was the plan, just me, my old cabin by Lake Marlow. And the kind of silence that makes your thoughts come clean. After 28 years in corporate finance, my life had shrunk down to legal documents, deadlines and coffee that never seemed hot enough. My wife Margaret used to call this cabin my reset button. When she passed 3 winters ago, the reset never came. I stopped visiting. The lake felt too quiet without her laughter bouncing off it, but this year something pulled me back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the simple need to breathe air that hadn't touched a city. So on the first Friday of December, I loaded the truck, grabbed a box of old letters I hadn't opened in years, and drove north. The road curved along the frozen lake like a memory I didn't want to forget. Pine trees thick with snow leaned in from both sides, their tips glowing in the dying orange of late afternoon. I remember thinking, it still looks untouched. Still ours. That illusion lasted exactly 5 minutes. When I turned into the gravel driveway, my headlights hit something that shouldn't have been there, a black Tesla and a white SUV, both parked where only my rusted pickup ever sat. The cabin lights were on. Curtains I didn't recognize were drawn over the windows, and from inside I heard laughter. Not the warm kind that belonged to family. This was the careless laughter of people who thought they owned the night. At first I thought maybe I'd been robbed. Then I noticed something worse. The padlock on the tool shed replaced. The handmade wooden sign that used to hang by the porch, the one Margaret carved with the words, "Henry and Maggie's Hideaway," gone. In its place was a shiny metal plaque that read, "The Denson Family Cabin," my last name, but not my choice. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching through snow. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't right, but the smell of grilled food and perfume spilling through the half-open window made my stomach twist. Someone had made themselves very comfortable. I walked up the porch stairs and pushed the front door open. It was unlocked. Warmth hit my face, and so did the noise. Music, glasses clinking. A woman's voice saying, "Honey, this place is perfect. I can't believe your dad just gave it to us." My eyes moved from face to face. Strangers lounging on my furniture, coats tossed carelessly over my handmade cedar chairs. Then my gaze stopped on the man standing by the fireplace, pouring whiskey into a glass that used to belong to me. He turned, and I felt the ground go out from under me. It was my son, Evan. For a few seconds neither of us moved, just me standing at the threshold. Half in the cold, half in the life I apparently no longer owned. "Dad," Evan finally said, his voice stiff like a man caught in a crime he doesn't yet admit to. Every guest in the room went quiet. The music faded under the sound of my heartbeat. I looked around again, slowly this time. The paintings on the wall, the new rug, the fake antler chandelier. They'd changed everything. Margaret's quilt, the one she spent 3 winters stitching, was folded neatly on the sofa. Except it wasn't folded neatly. It was being used as a dog blanket. There was a golden retriever asleep on it. Something broke inside me right then. Quiet, like a branch under heavy snow. "I didn't realize you'd moved in," I said, forcing my voice steady. Evan laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was going to tell you. We've been using the place for a while now. It made sense, you know? You weren't coming up here anymore." The woman beside him, tall, polished, city-type confidence, stepped forward with a half-smile. "Mr. Denson, I'm Claire. Evan's wife. We've been renovating. I hope you don't mind. Renovating." That word cut deeper than it should have. I stepped inside. The warmth didn't feel like comfort anymore. It felt stolen. "You changed everything." Claire smiled again, the kind of smile that assumes she already owns what she's talking about. It needed a fresh touch. "No offense, but this place was a little outdated." "No offense." I could almost hear Margaret laughing at that from wherever she was. I built half of this cabin with my own hands, I said. Outdated doesn't apply to things built with love, Evan sighed. Dad, it's not like that. Look, we were going to call you, but the papers... What papers? He froze. Claire's eyes darted to him, the way people do when they realize someone's about to say something they shouldn't. Evan, I said quietly. What papers? He looked down. Mom left it to me, Dad. The silence after that felt thick enough to choke on. Left. What to you? The cabin, he said. In her will. For a moment, all I heard was the wind scraping across the frozen lake outside. Margaret's will. I'd read it, and I was the executor. She left him money, yes, a savings account for his future. But not the cabin. Never the cabin. This was our place. Ours alone. I took a step closer. That's a lie. Evan's shoulders stiffened. Dad, please, you don't need to make this harder. Harder, I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. You're standing in my home, drinking my whiskey, telling me your mother, the woman who made this place, had just handed it to you like a toy. Dad, you forged something. He looked away, and that was all the confirmation I needed. Claire reached for his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. Evan's face turned pale. His friends suddenly found excuses to grab their coats. Everyone out, I said. Dad, I said out. They left, one by one, like shadows fading in reverse. When the last door shut, I faced my son. Where did you get the will? I didn't forge anything, he said quickly. I just made some adjustments. You weren't using it. I thought you thought, I snapped. You thought you could just take her memory, repaint it, rename it, and call it yours. His face hardened. You're not the only one who lost her, Dad. You disappeared after the funeral. You left me alone to handle everything. I buried my wife, I said quietly, and I buried the version of myself that could still pretend to care about business dinners and stock markets. I came up here every year for her birthday, even if I couldn't stay long. He looked at me like I was a stranger. You could have called. So could you. The air between us froze. Not the kind of silence that ends with apology. The kind that builds into something else. Something irreversible. Finally, Evan said, Look, Dad, the cabin's under my name now. You can't just show up and demand things. Baby, it's time you moved on. Moved on. The words hung there, poisonous and final. I wanted to shout, to grab him by the shoulders and shake him, until he remembered what decency felt like. But instead I just nodded once. Then I turned around, opened the door, and stepped back into the freezing wind. The snow had started again. And as I walked to my truck, I made myself a quiet promise, the kind a man only makes once in his life. If my son wanted to erase me, I'd show him what a father's silence can become, not vengeance. Not yet. Justice. The next morning, the world outside was white and cruel. Snow blanketed everything. The cabin roof, the old fence, even the path that used to lead down to the lake where Margaret and I used to sit with coffee and dreams. Now it was just me. The sound of tires crunching over frost as I drove back to town, replaying every word from last night, like a broken record. He said the will. He said it's under my name now, and he lied. I'd seen enough contracts, enough legal papers in my time to recognize that voice, that tone people use when they think they've gotten away with something, but aren't brave enough to face the truth. When I got back to my small house in town, the first thing I did was open the drawer under my old oak desk. Inside were Margaret's files. Real ones, the ones she had mailed to me before she passed. She was always organized. I could almost hear her voice in my head. Henry, someday this will matter. Keep it safe, and I did. Her will was there, yellowed at the edges, still folded neatly. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Her signature was clear. The witnesses' names were there. Every detail matched what I remembered. To my husband, Henry Denson, I leave the cabin on Lake Merrin, the place we built together. Not a single mention of Evan. I sat back in my chair, exhaling through clenched teeth. He forged it. Or someone helped him. That someone was where I'd start. The town had one law office, Baker and Sons Legal. I'd known them for years. Good people mostly, but there was one man there who had handled Margaret's paperwork when she got sick. His name was David Cale, a smarmy man in his 40s who smiled too much when he talked, and not in the friendly way. When I walked into his office that morning, he looked surprised to see me. "Henry Denson," he said, standing up, all charm and polished lies. "It's been a long time." "What brings you in?" "I want to review my wife's will." That smile wavered just a little. "Of course. But that was settled years ago. I'm aware." "Humor me." He nodded, gesturing toward a chair. "Give me a minute to pull the file." He left the room. The second the door clicked behind him, I scanned the place. Everything was neat, too neat, organized like a showroom instead of a real workspace. That's how I knew something was being hidden. I'd seen it before, back when I worked security for city developers. People always hid things in plain sight. He returned after a few minutes, holding a folder. He placed it on the table like a magician showing off a deck of cards. "Here it is," he said. "Margaret Denson's last will and testament." I took it, flipped it open, and froze. The handwriting was wrong. The paper was new. And her signature. It wasn't hers. "What is this?" I asked. He frowned. "That's the document on record, Henry. I oversaw the transfer myself." "This isn't her will." He blinked. "Excuse me?" She wrote it in her own hand. "This is typed, reprinted, and signed with something that looks like it was traced." David leaned back, crossing his arms. "Henry, I understand this must be upsetting. But your son came to me months ago saying you'd given verbal consent for him to inherit." "I what?" My voice cracked the air. "You think I'd hand over the only thing Margaret and I built together?" He hesitated. He showed documentation. "Email correspondence between you two confirming the transfer." Email. My stomach turned cold. I don't even use email anymore. "Show me," I said. He opened his computer and turned the screen toward me. There it was, a chain of messages between henrydensonigmail.com and ecollinsrealtyadomain.com. They looked official, except the writing style wasn't mine. I never used words like formalize or permanent transfer of deed. It was forged. Digitally, I stood up slowly. "Oh, you're complicit in this." David raised his hands. "Now wait a minute." "No, you wait," I said, voice low, steady. "I've known my son all my life. He's impulsive, but he's not smart enough to pull this off alone. Someone guided him, someone who benefits." His eyes flicked toward the side drawer near his desk, and that tiny, almost invisible glance told me everything I needed to know. I left without another word. That night I went through every scrap of paper Margaret left me. Bills, letters, notes, anything. Then, in one of her old recipe books, I found a folded piece of paper tucked between pages of her apple pie recipe. It wasn't a recipe. It was a handwritten note, addressed to me. "Henry, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I didn't trust David Cale. He kept insisting I make changes to my will when you weren't around. Said it would be easier for Evan someday, but I didn't. My will is final and signed by 2 witnesses, Laura McNeil and Pastor Green. Keep a copy safe away from town. People change when money's involved. Love, Em." My chest tightened. Margaret had known. Even dying, she'd sensed the rot under the surface, and I, her husband, had ignored it. Now it was too late to undo what had been done, but not too late to make it right. The next morning I drove to the church. Pastor Green was there, sweeping the snow off the steps. "Henry," he said, smiling warmly. "Good to see you, old friend." "Pastor," I said, showing him the letter. "I need your help." He read it silently. His brow furrowed. She was right to worry. I remember signing her will, the handwritten one. She brought Laura McNeil, the nurse, and as a second witness. Then the one filed now is fake. He nodded. Without question. Would you be willing to testify to that? He met my eyes. Of course. Margaret was a good woman. And what they've done, it's a sin, Henry. I squeezed his shoulder. Thank you, Laura McNeil was next. It took me 2 days to track her down. She'd moved to a nearby city after retiring from nursing. When I found her, she didn't hesitate. I remember her well, Laura said over the phone. She said she didn't trust that lawyer. I still have a note she gave me to hold. Said if anything ever happened, I should give it to you. My breath caught. You still have it? I do. By the time I got there, the note was waiting in an envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the real will, the same one I had at home, written in Margaret's hand, signed, witnessed, sealed. That was all I needed. The proof. The weapon. Now came the hardest part, facing Evan again. I didn't want to humiliate him. Despite everything, he was my son. But I couldn't let this go unpunished. So I waited until Sunday, the day he always went to lunch with Claire's parents at the local country club. When he saw me walk in, his face turned pale. Dad, what are you doing here? Having lunch, I said, pulling out a chair at his table. I figured it was time we had a family conversation. Claire's parents exchanged nervous glances. Claire herself folded her arms, visibly annoyed. Henry, this isn't really quiet, I said, calmly but firmly. You've all had plenty to say behind my back. Evan looked around, embarrassed. Dad, please. I pulled out 2 envelopes. One labeled truth, the other proof. I set them both on the table, opened them. He hesitated. What is this? Your mother's real will. And the lawyer's confession. Gasps went around the table. Evan's hands trembled as he opened the first envelope. Inside was Margaret's original handwritten will, witnessed, signed, and time-stamped years before her death. Then he opened the second. Inside was a printed email from David Cale, written the night before after I'd confronted him again. Henry, I can't keep this secret anymore. Your son pressured me into filing a false copy of the will. He promised a cut from the sale of the cabin, once transferred to his name. I'm willing to cooperate fully to avoid prosecution. The color drained from Evan's face. You forged your own mother's will, I said softly. You betrayed her memory, her trust, and the one thing she wanted us to share. His voice cracked. Dad, I didn't mean to... You meant every part of it, I interrupted. You thought you'd get away with it. You thought the old man wouldn't notice. Tears welled in his eyes. Claire looked furious, not at him but at me because she knew her meal ticket had just vanished. I leaned in close. You took something sacred, and I'll get it back, not for me, for her. Then I stood up, leaving the documents on the table. And as I walked away, I heard Evan's voice break for the first time since he was a boy. Dad, wait. But I didn't. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. And sometimes that silence is the only revenge a father needs. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. The air felt heavy, that kind of silence that comes before something important. I made myself a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream. Just the way Margaret used to say a man should face his problems. Bitter but honest. My hands shook slightly as I packed the documents into a worn leather folder. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about dignity, about showing my son that truth, no matter how buried, always finds its way back to the surface. By 9 a.m., I was at the county courthouse, the same building where 27 years ago, Margaret and I had signed our marriage license. Back then, the place smelled like fresh paper and promise. Now it smelled like dust and bureaucracy. At the clerk's office, I requested an emergency hearing to dispute the fraudulent will. I handed them both copies, the original handwritten one and the forged digital version filed by David Cale. The woman behind the counter scanned the papers, frowning. "This is serious, Mr. Denson. It looks like criminal forgery." "I'm aware," I said. "And I want to press charges against anyone who was involved." She nodded. "We'll have to call Judge Merrin. He'll want to see this personally." Judge Merrin, that was a name I hadn't heard in a decade. He'd been a family friend once, back when Evan was still a kid. If anyone would recognize Margaret's handwriting, it was him. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of bringing the right people together at the right time. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. Word must have spread quickly, because when I arrived, Evan and Claire were already waiting in the hallway. He looked smaller somehow, the arrogance gone, replaced by fear and shame. She, on the other hand, was dressed to impress, like she thought charm could erase guilt. "Dad," Evan said quietly, "can we talk before—" "No," I said. "You had plenty of time to talk before you stole from your own blood." He lowered his eyes. We entered the courtroom. It wasn't large, just a wood-paneled chamber with a single flag behind the bench. Judge Merrin sat at the center, flipping through the documents I'd submitted earlier. "Mr. Denson," he said, looking up at me, "I've reviewed your claim. These two wills are clearly not the same. The handwriting, the formatting, even the notary stamps differ." I nodded. Margaret's original was witnessed by Pastor Green and Laura McNeil. "Both are prepared to testify." "And Mr. Cale?" the judge asked. "Has he been notified?" Right on cue, the door opened. David Cale walked in, pale and sweating. His eyes darted toward me before he quickly looked away. He carried a small briefcase, probably the same one he used to hide other people's lies. Judge Merrin gestured for him to take the stand. "Mr. Cale, do you recognize these documents?" David swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you file the version marked Exhibit B, the typed one?" "I did." "Under whose instruction?" He hesitated. "Evan Denson." A low murmur rippled through the small crowd in the room. Evan's face went white. Claire's hand slipped from his arm. Judge Merrin leaned forward. "Did you know this was a forgery?" David nodded miserably. "Yes, I was promised a percentage from the sale of the lake property once the deed transferred. It was wrong and I regret it." I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired, so tired. Judge Merrin turned to Evan. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. Denson?" Evan stood, trembling. "Your Honor, I was desperate. Claire and I were drowning in debt. I thought my mother would have wanted me to have the cabin eventually." "I didn't mean to—" "Enough," the judge interrupted sharply. "Intent doesn't excuse forgery, fraud, or theft." He turned to me. "Mr. Denson, the court recognizes the original handwritten will as legally binding. The property on Lake Merrin is officially reinstated under your name. Mr. Cale will face charges for document tampering, and your son—" He sighed. "Will be placed on probation pending restitution." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat burned. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss wrapped in paper and signatures. After the hearing, Evan approached me outside. Snow was falling again, gentle and slow. For a while neither of us said anything. Finally he spoke. "Dad, I'm sorry." I looked at him. His eyes were red, the kind of red that doesn't come from anger but from realization. The moment when you finally understand what you've done. You broke something that can't be fixed. "Son," I said quietly, "not the cabin. That can be rebuilt. But trust, once it's gone, it's gone." He nodded, tears freezing on his cheeks. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back." "Don't try to earn it," I said, turning away. "Just live in a way that makes your mother proud." That's all she ever wanted. That night I drove back to the cabin. The storm had passed. The moon hung low, casting silver over the lake. The air was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it. Margaret's chair by the fireplace, her knitting basket beside it, the photo of us on our wedding day. She in that light blue dress she insisted was close enough to white. I sat down, staring at the flames. For years I thought revenge meant making the other person suffer. But sitting there I realized something deeper. Sometimes revenge is just the truth coming to light, slow, painful, unstoppable. And sometimes that truth burns cleaner than any fire. I poured myself a glass of her favorite brandy and raised it toward her picture. "You were right, Margaret," I whispered. "People show their true colors when money's on the table. But I kept my promise. Your legacy's safe." A soft wind brushed through the cabin, rattling the window panes. For a second I could almost swear I heard her voice again. Gentle, laughing, alive, and then I noticed something I'd never seen before. Tucked behind the frame of our wedding photo was a small folded piece of paper. I pulled it out carefully. The handwriting stopped my heart. It was Margaret's. "Henry, if you ever find this, it means you did the right thing. I knew you would. There's one more secret, love. Not about money, not about land, but about family. Evan is my son, yes. But Blake is yours too, even if the blood tests say otherwise. He loved you as a father more than anyone could have. Never forget that family isn't about who's born to us. It's about who stands beside us when the world falls apart. I love you, always. M." I sat there for a long time, holding the note. The fire crackled softly beside me. Tears rolled down my cheeks, quiet, steady, cleansing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry. I felt peace, because in that moment I realized Margaret had already planned everything, not the revenge, not the exposure, but the healing that would follow. She knew I'd find my way back. She trusted me to choose truth over rage, and I did. The next morning I walked down to the frozen lake. The sun was rising, soft gold bleeding into white. I took the folded letter and tucked it inside the same wooden box where I kept our wedding rings. As I sealed it shut, I whispered, "It's done, Margaret." It's finally over. Then I turned and walked back toward the cabin, not as a broken man, but as one who'd finally learned that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just quiet steps on fresh snow, leaving footprints that say I survived.